All right, good evening, folks. Thanks for joining us, and if you're joining us online, appreciate you. We are working our way through the book of Judges. We'll probably get through it tonight. We're going to start with chapter 19, and in this chapter, we have a horribly brutal story. I'm getting feedback up here, Ed, so if you cut the monitors down, I appreciate it. But in this chapter, we have a horribly brutal story. And if you know your Bible, the story we're going to read tonight sounds very familiar. It's very familiar because it's similar to the story of the events that happened before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis chapter 19. So, verse 1, chapter 19 of Judges. In those days, Israel had no king. Now a Levite who lived in a remote area in the hill country of Ephraim took a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. All right, so right off the bat, the stage is set for something to go horribly wrong because it says Israel had no king. And the point was not that they didn't have a political leader. The point was that they had no spiritual leader. They had no one to anchor the people around the common faith in Yahweh. And so we have a Levite or a priest who takes a concubine. In those days, a concubine was a legal partner, but didn't have the rights that a wife had. Not that women had that many rights to begin with. But throughout the Old Testament, we read about men, most of them prominent men, who had concubines. Abraham, Jacob, Caleb, just to name a few. And then, of course, Solomon had 300 concubines. While we read about this in the Old Testament, nowhere do we read that such a relationship was blessed or even sanctioned by God. And the teachings of Jesus in the New Testament make it clear that God's plan is for one man and one woman to be married. All right, verse 2. But she was unfaithful to him. She left him and went back to her parents' home in Bethlehem, Judah. After she had been there 4 months, her husband went to her to persuade her to return. He had with him his servant and 2 donkeys. She took him into her parents' home. When her father-in-law saw him, he gladly welcomed him. His father-in-law, the woman's father, prevailed on him to stay. So he remained with them 3 days, eating and drinking and sleeping there. On the 4th day, they got up to go up early and prepared to leave, but the woman's father said to his son-in-law, "Refresh yourself with something to eat, then you can go." So the 2 of them sat down to eat and drink together. Afterward, the woman's father said, "Please stay tonight and enjoy yourself." And when the man got up to go, his father-in-law persuaded him, so he stayed there the night. On the morning of the 5th day, when he rose to go, the woman's father said, "Refresh yourself, wait till afternoon." So the 2 of them ate together. Then when the man with his concubine and his servant got up to leave his father-in-law, the woman's father said, "Now look, it's almost evening. Spend the night here. The day is nearly over. Stay and enjoy yourself. Early tomorrow morning, you can get up and be on your way." But unwilling to stay another night, the man left and went towards Jebus, that is Jerusalem, with his 2 saddle donkeys and his concubine. All right, so we got a little story here about his father-in-law's hospitality. Even this hospitality is to the point where it seems to be a pain. But it's actually, maybe exaggerated a tad, but it's actually fairly typical of the hospitality of that time and place. Indeed, hospitality is a lost art in this country where people are so driven by the clock and the calendar. But in many countries today, hospitality and extreme hospitality is the norm. One time I was down in Mexico by myself and I was visiting some folks, and I just almost missed my bus back to Mexico City because the family I was with kept taking me to this friend's house and this friend's house and this friend's house, and everywhere you went, they'd have to feed you and bring you coffee, and I was so caffeinated and sugar high, I barely made it. Anyway, verse 11. When they were near Jebus on the day was almost gone. And the servant said to his master, "Come, let's stop at this city of the Jebusites and spend the night." His master replied, "No, we won't go into any city whose people are not Israelites. We'll go on to Gibeah." He added, "Come on, let's try to reach Gibeah or Ramah and spend the night in one of those places." So they went on, and the sun set as they neared Gibeah in Benjamin. Now, just stop right there. Benjamin's always in a bad light. They're like the redheaded stepchild tribe of the Jews. So things aren't going to be good if you're reading in the Bible and they're staying Benjamin. There, they stopped to spend the night. They went in and sat at the city square, but no one took them in for the night. All right, so we got, they were in Judah, they were in Jerusalem. We got extreme hospitality. They travel, they make it to another Israelite town. There they go into the town square, and nobody makes an offer at all. Nobody. They had go on to this town because they thought it would be safe, but no one took to them home. Moses in Leviticus 19 commanded the Jews to take people into their homes who were travelers because they were once travelers. Verse 16. That evening, an old man from the hill country of Ephraim, who was living in Gibeah, the inhabitants of the place were Benjamites, came in from his work in the fields. When he looked and saw the traveler in the city square, the old man asked, "Where are you going? Where did you come from?" He answered, "We're on our way from Bethlehem in Judah to a remote area in the hill country of Ephraim where I live. I have been to Bethlehem in Judah, and now I am going to the house of the Lord. No one has taken me in for the night. We have both straw and fodder for our donkeys and bread and wine for ourselves, your servants, me, the woman, and the young man with us. We don't need anything." "You are welcome at my house," the old man said. "Let me supply whatever you need. Only don't spend the night in the square." So he took them into his house and fed his donkeys, and after they had washed their feet, they had something to eat and drink. So the town where they were in was of the tribe of Benjamin, but a man from the tribe of Ephraim shows up and offers them hospitality. And so again, Benjamites, they just weren't favored, that's all. Verse 22, while they were enjoying themselves, some of the wicked men of the city surrounded the house. Pounding on the door, they shouted to the old man who owned the house, "Bring out the man who came to your house so we can have sex with him." So this is exactly the same scene that played out in Genesis 19. In that story, the point of the story was how wicked the people of Sodom and Gomorrah were. And they were people who didn't know Yahweh. The point here is that a number of the Israelites had become as wicked as Sodom and Gomorrah. How did this chapter begin? In those days, the people had no king. See, in those days, they had no spiritual leader, and now some of them have become as wicked as the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. Verse 23. The owner of the house went out and said to them, "No, my friends, don't be so vile. Since this man is my guest, don't do this outrageous thing. Look, here is my virgin daughter and his concubine. I will bring them out to you now, and you can use them and do to them whatever you wish. But as for this man, don't do such an outrageous thing." But the men would not listen to him, so the man took his concubine and sent her outside to them. And they raped her and abused her throughout the night, and at dawn they let her go. At daybreak, the woman went back to the house where her master was staying, fell down at the door, and lay there until daylight. So it's a horrible scene, so horrible that centuries later, the Israelite prophets still referred to this. In fact, the prophet Hosea in chapter 9, verse 9 says, "They have sunk deep into corruption as in the days of Gibeah." So this was sort of just a despicable time where the people were horrible. Morals were horrible. Not much we can say about this despicable scene. Verse 27. When her master got up in the morning and opened the door of the house, he stepped out to continue on his way, and there lay his concubine, fallen in the doorway of the house with her hands on the threshold. He said to her, "Get up, let's go," but there was no answer. Then the man put her on his donkey and set out for home. When he reached home, he took a knife and cut up his concubine. Supposedly she died on the way, limb by limb into 12 parts, and sent them into all the areas of Israel. Everyone who saw it was saying to one another, such a thing has never been seen or done, not since the day Israelites came up out of Egypt. Just imagine, we must do something, so speak up. So what he was doing was a prophetic message to the people of Israel. You caused this, basically, is what he was saying, and judgment for this will come upon you. All right, so the story continues in chapter 20. The people rally together to go teach the Benjamites a lesson. And this will show us, on one hand, that the people rallied to fight sin, but it also shows the state that the Jewish people were in at the time. They never had, since Moses delivered them and brought them into the promised land, they had not yet established themselves as a nation. They were simply a loose federation of individual tribes and clans, and now civil war had broken out. Verse 1, chapter 20. Then all the Israelites from Dan to Beersheba and from the land of Gilead came out as one man and assembled before the Lord in Mizpah. The leaders of all the people of the tribes of Israel took their places in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 soldiers armed with swords. The Benjamites heard that the Israelites had gone up to Mizpah. Then the Israelites said, tell us how this awful thing happened. So the Levite, the husband of the murdered woman, said, I and my concubine came to Gibeah and Benjamin to spend the night. During the night, the men of Gibeah came after me and surrounded the house, intending to kill me. They raped my concubine, and she died. I took my concubine, cut her into pieces, and sent one piece to each region of Israel's inheritance. What's another word for inheritance from this morning? Portion. Thank you. Because they committed this lewd and disgraceful act in Israel. Now, all of you Israelites, speak up and give your verdict. And so the spiritual application is, should we be our brother's keeper? And of course, the answer is yes. We have a moral responsibility towards one another. You know, sometimes I'll hear, nobody here, but I'll hear Christians talking about the behavior of somebody they know that's a Christian. I just can't believe they were doing that. Blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking to myself, well, what are you doing to change their behavior besides talking about them behind their back? Yeah. Verse 8. All of the people, hang on a minute. It's my wife sending me. Okay. All right. All the people rose as one man, saying, none of us will go home. No, not one of us will return to this house. But now this is what we'll do to Gibeah. We'll go up against it as Lot directs. We'll take 10 men out of every 100 from all the tribes of Israel, and 100 from 1,000, 1,000 from 10,000 to get provisions for the army. Then when the army arrives at Gibeah and Benjamin, it can give them what they deserve for all this vileness done in Israel. So all the men of Israel got together and united as one man against the city. The tribes of Israel sent men throughout the tribe of Benjamin, saying, what about this awful crime that was committed among you? Now surrender those wicked men of Gibeah so that we may put them to death and purge the evil from Israel. But the Benjamites would not listen to their fellow Israelites. From their towns they came together at Gibeah to fight against the Israelites. At once the Benjamites mobilized 26,000 swordsmen from their towns, in addition to 700 chosen men from those living in Gibeah. Among all these soldiers, there were 700 chosen men who were left-handed, each of whom could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. Israel, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 swordsmen, all of them fighting men. All right, so the Israelites are going to try to question the tribe of Benjamin, but that's to no avail. The tribe of Benjamin puts loyalty to their people before loyalty to God. Left-handedness was a trait common amongst the people of Benjamin. Early in Judges, we read about a left-handed Benjamite named Ehud. In the book of 1 Chronicles, we're told about how the tribe of Benjamin could shoot arrows and sling stones right or left-handed. Just a bit of trivia, I guess, they felt to include in the Bible. Verse 18, the Israelites went up to Bethel and inquired of God. They said, who of us shall go first to fight against the Benjamites? The Lord replied, Judah shall go first. The next morning, the Israelites got up and pitched camp near Gibeah. The men of Israel went out to fight the Benjamites and took up battle positions against them at Gibeah. The Benjamites came out to Gibeah and cut down 22,000 Israelites on the battlefield that day. So, remember back when the Israelites were going to conquer the land. And this was in the book of Joshua. And they had a battle. It was their second battle. It was the battle after the walls of Jericho came down. And about 30 men were killed. And they considered that utter defeat. But now, 22,000 of their men are killed. And perhaps, as some commentators have said, they were trusting in their own might. But we're not told. But the spiritual application of this story is very easy to detect. The most destructive battles and the battles that cause the most harm are amongst ourselves. They do the most harm. It's much more destructive when Christians fight amongst themselves. So we should fight our common enemy. Who's our common enemy? Huh? The adversary. Yes, sir. The devil, Satan. Verse 22, but the men of Israel encouraged one another and again took up their positions where they had stationed themselves the first day. The Israelites went up and wept before the Lord until evening, and they inquired of the Lord, and they said, shall we go up again to battle against the Benjamite, our brothers? The Lord answered, go up against them. Then the Israelites drew near to Benjamin the second day. This time, when the Benjamites came out from Gibeah to oppose them, they cut down another 18,000 Israelites, all of them armed with swords. Then the Israelites, all the people, went to Bethel, and then they sat there weeping before the Lord. They fasted that day until evening and presented burnt offerings and fellowship offerings to the Lord. And the Israelites inquired of the Lord. In those days, the ark of the covenant of God was there, with Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, ministering before it. They asked, shall we go up again to battle with Benjamin our brother or not? The Lord responded, go, for tomorrow I will give them into your hands. All right, we're not told specifically the reason the first two attempts failed, but we do know that they fasted and worshiped before this time. Again, we're going to make a spiritual leap. The spiritual battles that are most destructive are ones amongst ourselves, but spiritual battles amongst ourselves will never be resolved until we worship or fast and worship before the Lord. And remember, fasting was synonymous with prayer. So if they were fasting, they were praying. So they prayed and worshiped. Verse 29. Then Israel set an ambush around Gibeah. They went up against the Benjamites on the third day and took up positions against Gibeah as they had done before. The Benjamites came out to meet them and were drawn away from the city. They began to inflict casualties on the Israelites as before, so that about 30 men fell in the open field and on the roads, the one leading to Bethel and the other to Gibeah. While the Benjamites were saying, we are defeating them as before, the Israelites were saying, let's retreat and draw them away from the city to the roads. All the men of Israel moved from the places and took positions up at Baal Talmar, and the Israelite ambush charged out of its place on the west of Gibeah. The 10,000 of Israel's finest men made the frontal attack on Gibeah. The fighting was so heavy that the Benjamites did not realize how near disaster was. The Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel, and on that day, the Israelites struck down 25,100 Benjamites, all armed with swords. Then the Benjamites saw that they were beaten. Okay, so victory came, but the allied group lost more men than the one tribe of Benjamin. And when the people fight amongst themselves, as we're taught here, There's going to be a victory sooner or later, but it always comes at a high price. The following verses just give another retelling of the battle, and this one ends with a terrible scene. Verse 46. On that day, 25,000 Benjamite swordsmen fell, all of them valiant fighters, but 600 men turned and fled into the desert to the rock of Rimmon, where they stayed 4 months. The men of Israel went back to Benjamin and put all the towns to the swords, including the animals and everything else they found. All the towns they came across, they set on fire. All right, so what they've essentially done, and they realize it, and the next chapter will deal with it, is they had a horrible civil war. They were all sinful, and they just about destroyed one entire tribe, and now they got to figure out what they're going to do about it. And what they do about it is sinful too. So, a lot of times people read this and say, well, how can such horrible things happen in the Bible? They're not written. You can learn a lot from a bad example. Okay? And this is a bad example of how the people of God fight amongst themselves. And it's very costly. This is not here for us to say, oh, look at these mighty men of God. No, these aren't mighty men of God. These are despicable people who thought they were godly, but they weren't. And this is the way people who think they are godly but are not act. Okay? Verse 1, chapter 21. The men of Israel had taken an oath at Mizpah. Not one of us will give his daughter in marriage to a Benjamite. So this seems to have happened before, okay? They didn't like the Benjamites. They say, our daughters aren't going to marry them. And now the next verse, verse 2, seems to indicate that they had come to realize that the tribe of Benjamin was going to become extinct. Verse 2. The people went to Bethel, where they sat before God until evening, raising their voices and weeping bitterly. Oh Lord, the God of Israel, they cried, why has this happened to Israel? Why should one tribe be missing from Israel today? Early the next day, the people built an altar and presented burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. The Israelites asked, who from all the tribes of Israel has failed to assemble before the Lord? For they had taken a solemn oath that anyone who failed to assemble before the Lord at Mizpah should certainly be put to death. Now the Israelites grieved for their brothers, the Benjamites. Today one tribe is cut off from Israel. They said, how can we provide wives for those who are left, since we have taken an oath by Lord not to give them any of our daughters in marriage? Then they asked, which one of the tribes of Israel failed to assemble before the Lord at Mizpah? They discovered that no one from Jabesh Gilead had come to the camp for the assembly. For when they had counted the people, they found that none from the people of Jabesh Gilead were there. So the assembly sent 12,000 fighting men with instructions to go to Jabesh Gilead and put to the sword those living there, including the women and children. This is what you are to do: kill every male and every woman who is not a virgin. They found among the people living in Jabesh Gilead 400 young women who had never slept with a man, and they took them to the camp at Shiloh, Canaan. All right, don't forget how this entire story began back in chapter 17. Everyone did as they saw fit. The people had no king, and everyone did as they saw fit. This is not a story to say, oh, look at those people. No, this is a story of what happens when you have no spiritual leader in your life. It's total chaos. And so these people are committing an atrocity to make up for an atrocity. And the only way to make up for an atrocity is to go to God and repent. Verse 13. Then the whole assembly sent an offer of peace to the Benjamites at the rock of Rimmon. So the Benjamites returned at that time and were given the women of Jabesh Gilead who had been spared. But there were not enough for all of them. The people grieved for Benjamin because the Lord had made a gap in the tribes of Israel. And the elders of the assembly said, with the women of Benjamin destroyed, how can we provide wives for the men who are left? The Benjamite survivors must have heirs, they said. so that a tribe of Israel will not be wiped out. We can't give them our daughters as wives, since we are all Israelites, and we've taken an oath, cursed be anyone who gives a wife to a Benjamite. But look, there is an annual festival of the Lord in Shiloh, to the north of Bethel, to the east road that goes from Bethel to Shechem, and south to Lebanon. So they instructed the Benjamites, saying, go and hide in the vineyards and watch. When the girls of Shiloh come out to join in the dancing, rush from the vineyards, and each of you sees a wife from the girls of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. When their fathers or brothers complain to us, we will say to them, do us a kindness by helping them, because we did not get wives for them during the war, and you are innocent since you did not give your daughters to them. All right, so we got sanctioned kidnapping, an atrocity, and an effort to make up for an atrocity. You know, often I don't know about but often people sin to cover up a sin. Okay? That's the way sin is. You sin, and you got to sin to cover up for the sin. Then you got to cover up for that sin by a sin. And this is all we got going on here. All right? Now, we're going to have a lot about Benjamites. And we're even going to have some famous Benjamites here and there throughout the rest of the Bible. And it's just God's radical way to show how redemption can come and how God can choose people from the lowliest of places for God's work. Verse 23. So that is what the Benjamites did. While the girls were dancing, each man caught one, carried her off to be his wife. Then they returned to their inheritance, their portion, and rebuilt the towns and settled in them. At that time, the Israelites left that place and went home to their tribes and clans, each to his own inheritance. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit. You have to look how the story begins, and you have to look how the story ends. God did not sanction the taking of those women. He did not sanction the kidnapping. These were people performing atrocities to cover up atrocities, and it all happened because they had no spiritual leadership, so they did as they saw fit. Any questions about that horrible story? Pretty bad. Well, they went to God in prayer about the battle.
Yes, he said, go fight, and they all got 40,000 and 30 all got killed.
Yeah.
And God told them to do that.
Yeah. Maybe God figured they would have had good sense for them to pray and fast before they did it. You know? I think if we have a word from God, we should still pray about it. Okay? They didn't. They just said, okay, God told me to do it. Let's go do it. So they spiritually weren't prepared. But it's a good question, David. It's a good question. All right. You want to see if we can, I don't know if we can get through it. If you want to stay a couple extra minutes, we can. Through one of my favorite, maybe my top two favorite books of the Old Testament, top three. Hearing no objections, I'm gonna. So there. What's the next story? What's the next book? Ruth. Yes. Joshua judges Ruth. You can make a complete sentence out of that. Lyle Lovett had an album called that. You remember? Of course you do. Don't you, Lynn? Oh, please. You're not a Lyle Lovett fan? Oh, well. All right. Ruth. In the Hebrew scripture, Ruth is contained in a section of books which include the Song of Solomon, Ecclesiastes, Lamentations, and Esther. It was compiled in the form we have it, probably after the exile, maybe between the years 250 to 400 BC. Throughout the history of Israel, they have wrestled with the issue of what we would call mixed marriages, and this seems to be one of the central issues. Ruth was the great-grandmother of who? David. King David. She was, therefore, a direct ancestor of who else? There you go. We think the Jews were against mixed marriages, but here we have a foreigner in the most noted family. As we will see, and as we have seen in previous books, the issue was never mixed marriages in the form that we think of them today. We think of a mixed marriage between a black and a white, or Hispanic and a white, like my parents. But in those days, that a mix would not be questioned, but what was questioned was the God you worshiped. That was a mixed marriage, when people who worship different gods married. All right, chapter 1, verse 1. In the days when judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. And a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. All right, so this is during the time of the judges. The Old Testament rabbis put it here, because we've just finished that part of the book. So we really aren't sure when this took place. Probably sometime around 1200 to 1000 BC is a good guess. These weren't the best of days. It was characterized by everyone did what was pleasing in their own eyes, and they would get in trouble, and then they'd be subjected to a foreign country for 20 to 40 years. Then a judge like Gideon or Deborah would rise up. Well, these folks, things were going bad. There was a famine, probably because they weren't worshiping Yahweh. So they left to the country of Moab. They were sojourners, and the word in the Hebrew that we translate as a sojourner implies 2 things. They were going to be a resident alien in a foreign land, but they were planning to return when things improved in their homeland. So they went to Moab, which was east of the Dead Sea. Verse 2. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Names of characters were significant for these Jewish stories. Elimelech means God is king. Naomi means my joy or pleasant. Mahlon means weakening. Chilion means pining or wishing. The names were significant for their situation. They loved God, but they had to leave the land that God had promised them. So times they were getting weak and they were wishing they could be back there. Naomi, who is the main character out of these 4, withstands the troubled times, maybe because of the joy she has. Verse 3. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So these sons took local wives, and that would have been fine if they became a Jew. Naomi's husband and her sons die, and they would have been really worse than orphans. People would take in orphans, but you wouldn't have taken in a woman Naomi's age, because she's not going to have more kids. And so, you're not just going to feed this old woman. So she was in a terrible, desperate situation. There was no Social Security. There were the women with that plight either prostituted themselves or they died of starvation. So the name of the wives are significant. Orpah meant cloud or unclear or untrue. And this can be seen in her lack of dedication to her mother-in-law. Ruth, the heroine of this story, means friend. Verse 6. When she, Naomi, heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, Naomi and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. So the famine ends, crops are growing, and Naomi figures her best chance at survival is to get home where she had relatives. Verse 8. And then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you have shown to your dead and to me." So when she says go to your mother's home, that's really your mother's quarters, because women didn't own. But may the Lord show kindness. The Hebrew word is hesed. We've had it before. We'll have it again. Hesed meant mercy more than customary, okay? More than usual. Usually Hesed is used when God shows us mercy, but we're supposed to take that Hesed and be Hesed to others. Verse 9. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud and said to her, we will go back with you to your people. All right, so when she says, may the Lord grant that you find rest, that rest did not mean freedom from labor. It was a dangerous time for women to be alive on their own, and rest meant security. May you find some peace, okay? So these women would have to travel secretly at night. They would have to, they would have to be on the run and hide out. Verse 11. But Naomi said, return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me. All right, so this passage assumes that the reader is familiar with the Levirate law. Levirate law is found in Deuteronomy chapter 25, which says, if brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside of the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. And so when Ruth says, are you going to wait around till I have children and they grow old enough for you to marry? So again, this is a Jewish story to Jewish people, and the Jewish people knew what she was talking about. All right, verse 14. At this, they wept again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and to her gods. Go back with her. So here's one of the underlying points of the story. People, land, and God are all connected in the Jewish mindset. So she's going back to her people and to her gods. She had been worshiping Yahweh, but now she's going back to her people, which meant to her gods. Verse 16. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. All right, so this story is about the people, the land, and God. And here we have a Gentile woman, a pagan, who had married into an Israelite family. She is going to show us what family is all about. She forsakes her former lands, her former religion, for her current family. So even though her husband was dead, her husband's mother was living, and therefore in her mindset, this was her mother, and she had to take care of her. Remember from our study of the Ten Commandments in the book of Exodus, that little old command that we try to scare little kids with was never intended to be taught to little kids. Honor your mother and father was written for adults to take care of their aged parents. Okay? And that's what made the Jews different. They were nomads. And when they were in the desert, and they were nomads, and they would have to take care of their aged parents. Other nomads just left them there to die when they couldn't move along. So honor your mother and father, take care of your aged parents. All right, so the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, can this be Naomi? So the whole town was stirred. It was humming with activity in the Hebrew. Verse 20, don't call me Naomi, she told them, call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. So, again, Naomi meant joyful. Don't call me joyful, call me Mara, Mara means bitter. Okay? Verse 22. So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. The harvest is beginning. This is great literature. This is great storytelling. The harvest is beginning. What does that mean? There's hope. There's hope. People hearing this story for the first time. The harvest was beginning? Okay, we are moving into the holiday season. How many of y'all, I know the women do, how many of y'all watch them Hallmark movies, okay? You know you do. This is a Hallmark story. Okay? What we're about to read from chapter 2 on is a Hallmark story. In every sense of the word. We got 20 minutes. It might take me 25, but let's stick. This is a beautiful, wonderful story. Verse 1. Now, Naomi had a relative on her husband's side from the clan of Elimelech, a man of standing, whose name was Boaz. Okay, it's a romance story. Okay, because now we got a guy. We got a guy in town, and he's a big wig, and he's got money, and he's a relative, and the harvest is coming in. There's some hope here. Boaz was a man of standing. Others say he was a mighty man of wealth. Verse 2. And Ruth, the Moabitess, said to Naomi, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor. Naomi said to her, go ahead, my daughter. So she went out and began to glean in the fields behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she found herself working in the field belonging to Boaz. This is a romance story, people. Oh, happy day. She's there. And he was from the clan of Elimelech. So Deuteronomy chapter 24 says, when you're harvesting in your field and you overlook a sheaf, don't go back and get it. Leave it for the alien, the fatherless, the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in the work of your hands. All right, so she goes off to glean, and lo and behold, she's in a field belonging to Boaz. Verse 4. Just then, wouldn't you know it, just like a romance novel, Boaz arrives from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. Now, the harvesters are people that actually work for him. The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you, they call back. Boaz asked the foreman of his harvesters, whose young woman is that? The foreman replied, she's the Moabitess who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. She went into the field and has worked steadily from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. Oh, woo, come on, people, this is a great story. Right off the bat, there in verse 4, we learn that Boaz is not only wealthy, he's a godly man, because he comes out to his field and his workers are out there, and, he's like, the Lord be with you. He's a godly man, and they shout back to him because he's a good guy who treats them well. And, Ruth, as a foreigner, didn't have the rights to be gleaning that the Jews did. She had to wait till the Jews were done. But the foreman gives a report to Boaz that was favorable. She's a hard-working woman. She's been out there all day working hard. So Boaz said to Ruth, now he's going to talk to her. It's getting exciting. Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with my servant girls. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the girls. I have told the men not to touch you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled. So he offers her the chance to keep staying with his servant girls, who she would have to stay behind, but she's got to be right there with the servant girls. They got the first pick of the gleanings. And he's telling the men not to touch her. This was a very difficult time. Most of the world it is, to be a woman. But in that particular time, it was horrendous. This indicates the rough treatment that women and foreign women would receive. Verse 10. At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She exclaimed, why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner? Boaz replied, I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with the people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you richly be rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. So, Boaz heard how she had been loyal to her mother-in-law. That doesn't seem radical to us, but consider the time and the culture. They crossed a barren land. They ran the risk of starvation, dehydration, wild animals, and men capturing them to sex traffic them. So Ruth has proven herself to be an honorable woman. And her behavior was not only honorable, it was attractive to Boaz. No, yes, it was attractive. He saw godly characteristics in her, and it was attractive. Verse 13, "May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord," she said. "You have given me comfort and have spoken kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servant girls." All right, verse 14. "At mealtime, Boaz said to her, 'Come over here.'" See, they were looking at each other and they were catching each other's eye. This is really what's going on. You got to read it like it really is. "Have some bread and dip it into the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men. "Even as she gathers among the sheaves, don't embarrass her. Rather, pull out some from the stalks and the bundles and leave it there for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her." Woo! Boaz is smitten. I tell you, this is a love story. It's a love story. So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed so she's been working from sunup till late in the evening. She threshed the barley she had gathered. It amounted to an ephah. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. So this is a really wonderfully crafted story. I don't know if you've ever been to a storyteller's convention or whatever, but this storytelling is just good stuff here. Verse 19, her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." And Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz," she said. "The man who took notice of you." Well, so Naomi knew that a foreigner would not have been able to collect as much as she did. Naomi knew that somebody must have taken notice of her for her to have gotten that much food. Verse 20, "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." She added, "That man is our close relative. He is one of our kinsmen redeemers." So, not stop showing kindness, that's hesed, this word here. So he has not stopped showing us kindness beyond what was necessary. Okay. The Jews who were hearing this story for the first time would have seen the connection and the possibility that Levirate law had an opportunity to be fulfilled. That is, Ruth had a chance to be married to a kinsman of her husband. Here's the big hint. He's a kinsman redeemer. His actions would redeem the name of her child. All right, verse 21. Then Ruth, the Moabitess, said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain.' Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, 'It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with his girls, because someone else's field you might be harmed.' So Ruth stayed close to the servant girls of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law." All right. So the harvest has been going on for some time now. Ruth and Boaz have been sharing glances, probably for weeks, maybe a month or more. Naomi is a wise woman. She knows it's time for Ruth to make a move, to get herself a man, okay? But it's also for Naomi's benefit as well. Verse 1. One day, Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, Should I not try to find a home, or it might say rest or security, for you, where you will be well provided for? Now remember, it was a responsibility of the parent to find a spouse for the child, and Ruth is, in essence, her child. Verse 2. Is not Boaz, whose servant girls you have been, a kinsman of ours? Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash and perfume yourself and put on your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know that you're there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying, and then go uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. Whew! There's been a little controversy concerning this passage, because what's going on here? Well, I'll tell you what's going on. Naomi's saying, go seduce him. That's what's going on, people. Go get yourself a man. Winnowing would be done in the evening. After dark, there would be great piles of grain. Someone would stay overnight to guard the grain, and it appears that person in this case would be Boaz. But the controversy stems from the phrase, uncover his feet. While it doesn't seem controversial to us, uncovering one's feet was often a euphemism for sexual advances. It could also, however, so just settle down, it could also be a sign of submission, okay? The rest of the chapter makes it appear that it was probably a sign of submission. Verse 5. I will do whatever you say, Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. Then Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, and he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled him, and he turned and discovered a woman lying at his feet. Who are you? He asked. I'm your servant Ruth, she said. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer. She just proposed. She did. She did, people. We read that, oh, that's just not. No, come on, people. Look at what's going on here. All right. So she asked for his protection since he is a kinsman redeemer. He is her chance of a life for her and her mother. Verse 10. The Lord bless you, my daughter, he replied. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am near of kin, there is a kin. Oh no. You know, in those romance stories, you know, it's always like they're going to get together and then, oh no. They got a job offer in New York City and they're going to move from the country. No. I might have watched one with Lisa one time. But if you've watched one, you've watched them all, okay? And this is what's going on here. Verse 12, although it is true that I am near of kin, there is a kinsman redeemer nearer than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to redeem, good, let him redeem. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning. So again in verse 10, he says, this kindness, the word is hesed, mercy beyond what is necessary. So Ruth has proven herself to the fellow townsmen as well as to Boaz to be of noble character. Verse 14. So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anybody could be recognized. And he said, do not let it be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. He also said, bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out. When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law Naomi, she said, how did it go, my daughter? Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her and added, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Then Naomi said, wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today. All right. So unmarried women wore shawls, okay? So she had been traveling around with this shawl on because that's what unmarried women did. And Boaz says, bring that here, and he fills it up. So she can't put it on now. He answered her marriage proposal. See, this is why we study the Bible, because there's stuff we miss, and it's such a beautiful story. Verse 1. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat there. When the kinsman redeemer he had mentioned came along, Boaz said, come over here, my friend, sit down. So he went over and sat down. Boaz went to the town gate. So this is like where all the leaders and the bigwigs went, and he could do that because he was one. Verse 2. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, sit here, and they did so. Then he said to the kinsman redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling a piece of land that belonged to our brother-in-law Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line. I will redeem it, he said. Uh-oh, time for a commercial. We'll never know. Let's just finish this no, okay, we'll finish it tonight. We got to know what happens. Verse 5. Then Boaz said, see, Boaz, he's a smart dude. He's a smart guy. He was anticipating this answer. Verse 5. Then Boaz said, on the day you buy the land from Naomi and from Ruth the Moabitess, you acquire the dead man's widow in order to maintain the name of the dead in this property. So 2 things to note here. The land, which must have been Naomi's husband. Women usually didn't own property, but it seems like she had the rights to it. And the land is now called Naomi and Ruth's. Ruth is a daughter legally. And the second thing, if you bought land from the widow, you actually bought the widow. But he would actually be acquiring both women. Okay, verse 6. At this, the kinsman redeemer said, then I can't redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. The King James says, and the kinsman said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar my own inheritance. We don't know for certain what the problem may have been for that man. Maybe his inheritance for his sons was already divided. If he acquired more land and 2 additional wives, and maybe more sons from Ruth, it would cause him more trouble than he thought the land was worth. Verse 7. Now, in the earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. Paul, is this still how they do land transactions in Bradley County, to take the sandal? That doesn't work? Okay. So the kinsman redeemer said to Boaz, buy it yourself. And he removed the sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabitess, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from the town records. Today you are witnesses. The sandal ceremony, by the way, was in Deuteronomy chapter 25. Verse 11. Then the elders and all those at the gate said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrath, and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore in Judah. So Boaz took Ruth, she became his wife. Then he went to her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons has given him birth. Then Naomi took the child, laid him on her lap, and cared for him And the women living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron the father of Ram. Ram the father of Amminadab. Amminadab the father of Nahshon. Nahshon father of Salmon. Salmon father of Boaz. Boaz father of Obed. Obed father of Jesse. Jesse the father of David. All right, main point of this story. Marriage is not about ethnicity, it's about faith. And look at the characteristics that were attractive to Boaz. She was a noble character, hardworking, and she loved the Lord. Ruth became a Jew, lived like a Jew, adopted the Jewish ways. She was a foreigner by blood only. She became a Jew by faith. And she became an ancestor of King David, the greatest of the Jewish kings. All right, beautiful story, isn't it? It is. It's a wonderful story. Any questions? Look at that, 7:01. Whew. We kept up this pace, we'll be done in the Old Testament in no time. No. All right, let's pray. Lord, we give you thanks. Tonight we had really two completely different types of stories. One about how horrible we become when we have no spiritual center. And then one, how blessed our lives can be when we center our lives upon you. Let that be a lesson we take to heart, Lord. Thank you for these stories. Be with us now as we travel our separate ways. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thanks, folks.